As the final bell rang, I turned to see my entire class frozen in place. For a split second, I was terrified. Then I laughed it off, assuming they were playing a prank. We had just finished our final exams, and now we were waiting for the final bell to ring so we could go home for the summer. Our teacher, Miss Stell, had left the room to get us some cookies and milk. I was so scared that I started to run for the door, but as I did, I felt something cold grab onto my ankle and pull me back. I turned around and saw a small child walking towards me. P. He opened his mouth and showed me his teeth. They were long and sharp and looked like fangs. The child lunged at me and I screamed. P scratched up my arm and then bit down on my shoulder. I cried out in pain, but it didn't seem to bother the child at all. P. He was walking down the hallway, and he didn't seem to notice me or the monster behind me. I called out to him, but he didn't hear me. I turned around and saw that Mr. Williams was now facing me, and he had a shocked expression on his face. I could still hear the monster outside the door, banging and scratching and trying to get in. But I was safe, or so I thought, because when I turned around, I saw that the store wall was covered in flesh. And as I watched in horror, the flesh started to move. I screamed and tried to hide, but it was too late. The monster had found me. Run, he said. Get away while you can. Bye. Didn't need to be told twice. I turned and ran as fast as I could down the hallway. It happened to a young boy named Timmy, and to this day, no one knows what happened to him. There was blood on his hands and on his mouth. He stopped in front of me and stared into my eye. Instead, he put his hand over my mouth and dragged me towards the door. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more terrifying tales. I struggled against him, but he was too strong. He pushed me to the ground, and I felt something sharp pierce my leg. I screamed in pain, and he smiled. Bye. And that's when I saw the darkness inside them. He reached out and touched my arm. It was iced cold, and I could feel the shiver go down my spine. He's whispering your name, isn't he? Don't try to fight it. Just let him take you. Join the others. There's no escape. He'll always find you. No matter where you go, he'll be waiting for you in the darkness. Then I laughed it off, assuming they were playing a prank. Brr. Then I noticed a small child in the back of the classroom slowly turning around. When he looked at me, he had a big smile on his face. I didn't think anything of it. I just smiled back and waved. But then he did something that made my blood run cold. He opened his mouth and showed me his teeth. They were long and sharp and looked like fangs. Always, one day he was just there in class, and the next day he was gone. Some people say he was taken by the monster, but I don't know. All I know is that this story is true and that the monster is still out there. I could hear the monster behind me, slithering and screeching, but I didn't dare look back. I tried to grab onto his leg, but he just brushed me off, like I wasn't there. That's when I realized I wasn't actually running. I was frozen in place just like everyone else. He just kept biting and and clawing at me until I blacked out. I'd never seen him before in my life. I tried to call out to him, but no sound came out of my mouth. I couldn't speak. And then he started to walk towards me. Slowly at first, then faster. His eyes were fixed on me, and it was like he was hypnotized. I tried to move away, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. It was like my vocal cords had been cut, and I felt his claws digging into my shoulder, and I knew it was the end. The child was about 5 years old, and he was wearing a jacket that was far too big for him. "Why?" I asked him. "Why did you do that?" But as I ran, I could hear him slithering behind me. I could feel his cold, slimy body pressing against my back, and I could smell his horrible stench. It smelled like rotting flesh and decay. The child looked at me and said, "Because I'm hungry." Then he lunged at me again. But this time, I was prepared. I kicked him in the stomach, and he let out a scream that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Then he started to melt away into a puddle of black goo. The child reached out and touched the ice, and it melted instantly. The child looked up at me and smiled. "Don't be afraid," he said. I nodded, relieved that someone was finally there to help me. But as the child walked closer, I could see that his face was pale and his eyes were dark and soulless. He looked like a zombie. I screamed and tried to free my ankle from whatever had grabbed onto it, but it was no use. I looked down and saw that my foot was stuck inside a block of ice. The ice was slowly spreading up my leg, and I knew if it reached my waist, I would be frozen forever. She would do this every year on the last day of school, as a little celebration. We were all excited to eat the cookies and drink the milk, and then go home and start our summer vacation. But then I noticed a small child in the back of the classroom, slowly turning around. And when he looked at me, he had a big smile on his face. It all started on the last day of school. The bell rang and everyone started talking and laughing. I was sitting at my desk trying to clean up my things. When I looked up, I saw everyone in my class was frozen in place, staring blankly ahead with a look of terror on their faces. It was like they had all been turned to stone. I was scared, but I tried to laugh it off. Maybe they were playing some kind of prank, so I started to walk over to them. But the closer I got, the more scared I became. Their faces were still frozen in place, and their eyes were wide open and staring blankly ahead. It was like they were all dead. I started to scream for help, but no one was coming. It was like everyone in my class had been taken hostage by some evil spirit. Then I heard a voice behind me say, "Leave him alone." Then he did something that made my blood run cold. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor and the child was standing over me. He was smiling and his eyes were glowing red. I was so disgusted that I ran out of the classroom and into the hallway. I needed to get away from that monster. Then I saw my savior. It was my gym teacher, Mr. Williams. The monster was getting closer and I could feel his hot breath on my neck. But suddenly, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through my body and I was free. I ran into the girls' bathroom and locked myself inside a stall. And the last thing I remember is his soulless eyes boring into mine, and his sharp fangs dripping with saliva. No. Before we end this story today, I want you to know that this happened to a real person. And if you listen closely, you can hear him now. Can you hear him? And now, just as a special treat, because you made it to the end of the story, I've got a little bonus creepy pasta for you. As the final bell rang, I turned to see my entire class frozen in place. For a split second, I was terrified. That's when I knew something was wrong. This kid wasn't from my class. As he got closer, I could see that his face was pale and his clothes were dirty and torn. "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. "Now we're all connected," he said. And that's when I knew I was in grave danger. What did you think of that story? Do you believe in ghosts? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I was the night janitor at a big high school. I did one final sweep of the entire building before clocking out for the night. It was a tedious job, but someone had to do it, and the night watchman was too lazy to do it properly. I tried the doorknob. To my surprise, it was unlocked, and I pushed the door open and walked inside. The classroom was empty. All the desks were neatly arranged in rows facing the blackboard. A sliver of moonlight spilled out onto the floor, illuminating a pair of worn leather shoes. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ear. The shoes took another step forward, and I saw a pair of black trousers. The legs were thin and bony, and the knees were slightly bent, like the person wearing them was hunched over. I had to finish my shift somehow, even though I knew I wouldn't be alone. And every night after that, I would go back to that room, and I would see him. And every night he would tell me the same thing. "I'm here. I'm here. Die." I never left. Now I walk past that school every day, on my way to work, and I still hear him. He's still there, trapped in that classroom, waiting for anyone to play with him forever. But then the rest of him came into view, or what was left of him. He was wearing a tattered white shirt that hung in rags from his skinny frame. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at me, or rather he looked through me, and a smile spread across his face. "Hello," he whispered, his voice raspy and weak. "Do you want to play with me?" I stared back at him, unable to speak or move. Fear turned my legs to lead and my throat to sandpaper. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen like a statue, but I couldn't. I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no waking. Peas, which was bare, except for some chalked drawings of stick figures. "Don't be afraid," he rasped, his smile widening. "Ghost," the lead officer said, with a skeptical shake of his head. "Yeah, right. Look, I appreciate you calling, but we have more important things to worry about." He turned to leave, then paused. "You sure you were alone in that room, son?" I nodded, my heart still pounding in my chest. "Yeah, I was alone. I lied. I knew I wasn't alone in that room. I had seen the boy, the ghost with his vacant eyes and his tattered clothes. Oh, no one believed me. They never do. I won't hurt you. We can be friends. You can play with me forever." With that, he lunged. I screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over my cleaning supply. The boys' laughter echoed through the empty halls as I ran for my life. I didn't dare look back to see if he was pursuing me, but I could hear his footsteps gaining on me. I ran until I reached the front doors, fumbled with the handle, and burst out into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The windows were large and set in the walls, high above my head, baylit in the warm evening light. I made the room feel almost inviting. In the far corner, there was a large filing cabinet with several drawers hanging open, revealing rows of folders and papers. The rest of the room was in darkness. I couldn't see anything else. I thought maybe the sound I heard was just a branch scraping against the window in the wind. Then I noticed something strange. On one of the desks, there was a half-empty glass of water with a blue straw sticking out of it. I knew Miss Warren liked to keep a glass of water at her desk, but she always drank it all by the end of the day. Plus, it looked like the water had been there for a while. So, it fell to me. One night, I was doing my rounds, and I walked past Mrs. Warren's classroom. One felt a sudden chill. I decided to call the police, just to be sure there wasn't a body in the room somewhere when they arrived. They searched everywhere but found nothing. Looks like we got another prankster on our hands, the lead officer said with a sigh. Some kids like to sneak into the old school buildings at night. They think it's haunted, so it gives them a kick to spend the night here. He turned to me, his eyes twinkling. How about you? Think this place is haunted? Boo. I laughed nervously, relieved that it was probably just kids playing around. But even as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was definitely wrong. As I passed by, I heard a noise from inside, like a pencil scratching on paper. Sometimes it was the scratching sound again, sometimes footsteps. Once, I even heard what sounded like muffled screams. Of course, I never went back into that room at night. I tried to convince myself that it was just mice or pipes, but deep down I knew there was something else at work. Then, one night, I heard a voice, a boy's voice, purr. I was sweeping the floor near the classroom when I heard him. He was talking to himself, and his words were barely audible, but I strained to listen. They don't see me. They can't see me. They don't know I'm here. I stopped sweeping and stared at the closed door. The voice came again, louder this time. I'm here. I never left. Fear clutched at my heart. Was the boy talking about the room, about staying in the room? I wanted to run, to get as far away as possible from that voice, but my feet seemed glued to the spot. Curious, I stopped and listened. The scratching continued, and it sounded like it was coming from inside the room. Since no one should have been in the building, I cautiously approached the door and pressed my ear against it to listen more closely. Poof. The scratching sound was still audible, but now I could also hear what sounded like soft sobbing. Concerned about who could be in the classroom and whether they needed help, I knocked lightly on the door. Hello, I called out. Is anyone there? After a moment, the scratching and sniffling stopped. Then I heard footsteps inside the room, followed by what sounded like a chair being pushed back. Silence. I waited, hoping for a response, but none came. As I rounded the corner into the last hallway, I saw a single desk with a chair pulled up to it in the center. No students were present, but something told me to investigate further. I walked closer and realized that the lone desk belonged to Ms. Warren, who was never in her classroom after 3 p.m. Peered over my shoulder to see if anyone was coming down the hallway, then reached out and slowly pushed open the door. The room was dark, except for a sliver of moonlight shining through a window. Suddenly, a voice startled me. Hello. Startled, I spun around to find the source of the voice. That's when I saw the boy sitting at the desk. He had his head down, shoulders shaking slightly, as if he were crying. P's chair was pushed away from the table, which was covered with books and papers. Are you okay? I asked, hesitantly, taking a step inside. The boy lifted his head and turned to me, a wide smile spreading across his face. Oh, great, he said. Someone finally noticed me. What did he mean? Why was he hiding in this room? And why did he look so emaciated? My curiosity got the better of me and I stepped inside. It had been years since I worked at that school, but every night I would do a sweep of the building, making sure all the lights were turned off and the doors were locked for the night. Deciding to check things out, as I stood there thinking about it every night, I would hear strange noises in that classroom. The voice stopped abruptly, and silence filled the air. Then I heard footsteps, slow and heavy, approaching the door. The doorknob rattled, and the door creaked open. Hao took a step toward me, and I involuntarily took a step back. That night, I called the police again. When they arrived, I told them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. And so the next night I went back to finish my cleaning. This was my senior year in high school. It was me, Jacob, Sam, and Josh. We were all really good friends. And we decided that when we turned 18, we were going to celebrate. The problem was our parents wouldn't let us have a party, so we had to get creative. We went back behind the school and unlocked the basement door and started to walk down the stairs. It was pitch black, but we brought a flashlight with us. As we were walking, we started hearing these strange noises like chains dragging metal moan. Then we saw this big metal cage in front of us on the bottom of the page. So we started to flip through the pages as fast as we could, desperate to find another photo. After a while, we found another one. Was this some kind of sick joke? We started flipping through the pages again, but this time we slowed down a bit. We didn't want to find anything else. It was of Jacob's family. They had moved here from another state when we were sophomores. On the bottom of the page was the date and it said 1983. Then we turned the page and it was a photo of Josh and his family. Maybe someone had slipped the photos in there as a joke, but then we remembered that we had taken the yearbook home at the end of the year. No one else had access to it. We were looking for any photos of me and my family, but we couldn't find anything. We were about to give up hope when we saw a familiar face. Why were all of these photos from the same year? Why was there no photos of my family? What did this mean? It was me. I was in this photo, but it wasn't my family. It was a photo of my 4th grade class. but on the bottom of the page was the date, and it said 1983. My biological family had no idea that I even existed, but what really got us was that there was unit of photos, me and my family. I was adopted and grew up in foster care. My biological family had no idea that I even existed. We were looking for any photos of me and my family, but we couldn't find anything. We found yearbooks all the way back to 1975. And in every single one of them, boom, I was in the photo, but my family was never in any of them. How could there be a photo of everyone's family except mine? We started to panic. Why were all of these photos from the same year? Why was there no photos of my family? What did this mean? We were looking for any photos of me and my family, but we couldn't find anything. We were about to give up hope when we saw a familiar face. It was me. I was in this photo, but it wasn't my family. It was a photo of my 4th grade class. I was adopted and grew up in foster care. My biological family had no idea that I even existed. We were about to give up hope when we saw a familiar face. It was me. We all jumped and stared at each other in fear. Who could that be? I was in this photo, but it wasn't my family. It was a photo of my 4th grade class. Whoever it was getting closer. We couldn't let whoever it was in, but we also couldn't keep hiding forever. We were terrified of what might happen next, but we knew that we had to do something. We couldn't stay in hiding forever. We had to come up with a plan, and quick. We were looking for any photos of me and my family, but we couldn't find anything. We were about to give up hope when we saw a familiar face. We held our breath and waited, but there was nothing. We were safe. For now, if I was born in 1984, then why did I start school in 1983? It was me. I was in this photo, but it wasn't my family. It was a photo of my 4th grade class. We couldn't find one for 1983, but we did find one for 1984. We bought the yearbook and waited for it to arrive. But that didn't make sense because I was in a 4th grade class. I wasn't born in 1984. I was born in 1983. But if I was born in 1983, then why do I have no memories of the first 11 months of my life? Why were all of these photos from the same year? Why was there no photo of my family? What did this mean? So we went online and started searching for old yearbooks. I wasn't born in 1984. I was born in 1983. But if I was born in 1983, then why do I have no memories of the first 11 months of my life? We couldn't find one for 1983, but we did find one. For 1984, we bought the yearbook and waited for it to arrive. We found a 1982 yearbook, but I wasn't in it. I was adopted and grew up in foster care. My biological family had no idea that I even existed. So we went online and started searching for old yearbooks. We couldn't find one for 1983, but we did find one for 1984. We bought the yearbook and waited for it to arrive. What was going on? Why was I in a 1983 yearbook? And why was there no record of me before that? In this photo, it showed his family and it was dated 1983. Date and it said 1983. But we graduated in 2004. How could this be a photo from 21 years ago? We stared at it in disbelief, thinking that we had discovered something impossible. I don't know what was in there, but whatever it was big because the floor was shaking beneath our feet. How could there be a photo of everyone's family except mine? I was adopted and grew up in foster care. My biological family had no idea that I even existed. One day in history class, Mr. Williams fell asleep, and we heard about this legend in our school. Why were all of these photos from the same year? Why was there no photos of my family? What did this mean? Which was that if you snuck into the basement of the school at midnight, then the janitor wouldn't catch you because he didn't work weekends. So it was a perfect plan. We would sneak into the school after hours and have a small little party down there. So we told Mr. Williams that we were gone, go to the bathroom, and we ran out of the school. We started to panic and run away, but as we were running, Sam tripped over something and fell to the ground. At around midnight, we were getting pretty drunk and we decided to look through our old yearbooks. So we went online and started searching for old yearbooks. We couldn't find one for 1983, but we did find one. For 1984, we bought the yearbook and waited for it to arrive. We were looking at some of the old photos and we saw this one particular photo. It was of me, Jacob, Sam, and Josh from our freshman year. It was just a normal photo. There was nothing wrong with it. The cage started to shake even more violently, and whatever was inside started to growl. We never told anyone about that night, not even each other, until about 10 years later, when it finally stopped. We slowly approached the cage and peeked over. Inside was a big dog, a Saint Bernard, and when Sam fell, he dropped his flashlight, and the dog must have thought that we were trying to feed it to him, because he started to growl and bark. We threw the flashlight back over the cage, and then quickly ran out of the basement and ran home. It was a few weeks after graduation, and we were hanging out at my house playing video games. But then Jacob turned the page and looked closer and said, "Hey guys, look at this." Then we started to wonder how many other photos were in the yearbook from that year. At this point, we were completely freaked out. We didn't know what was going on. What did this mean? That's when we came across a photo of Sam and his family. We looked at each other in disbelief. How could there be a photo of everyone's family except mine? We started to panic. We tried to calm ourselves down and think of a logical explanation. We decided that we needed to get to the bottom of this. When it did, we all got together again and started flipping through the pages. On the bottom of the page was the date, and it said 1983. I was adopted and grew up in foster care. We looked at each other in disbelief. How could there be a photo of everyone's family except mine? We started to panic. We decided that we needed to get to the bottom of this. When it did, we all got together again and started flipping through the pages. On the bottom of the page was the date, and it said 1983. Now we were really scared. We went to the local library and started digging through old yearbooks. We looked at each other in disbelief. How could there be a photo of everyone's family except mine? We started to panic. We decided that we needed to get to the bottom of this. When it did, we all got together again and started flipping through the pages. On the bottom of the page was the date, and it said 1983. We looked at each other in disbelief. We decided that we needed to get to the bottom of this. So we went online and started searching for old yearbooks. When it did, we all got together again and started flipping through the pages. But on the bottom of the page was the date, and it said 1983. We were all scared at this point, but we were also confused. That's when it hit me. I wasn't adopted. The only thing we could think of was that maybe my parents had put me up for adoption before I turned. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't adopted. We were sitting in my basement in silence, trying to process everything, when suddenly we heard a knock at the door. We crept closer to the door and listened intently. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking continued. We could hear footsteps in front of the door. We started to panic. What do we do? As the knocking continued, we all huddled together in the dark, our hearts pounding in our chests. And then, just when we thought it was too late, the knocking stopped.